Hello. Today we're going to take a look at adventure number 4 in the Adventures of Tintin, the 4th volume that Hergé produced in his series, The Cigars of the Pharaoh. And it was originally, when it began to be serialized in the black and white newspaper form, it was, I believe it was called something like Tintin's Adventure Reporter in the Far East, something like that. And it was a long story that eventually was collected into 2 volumes. The first of those was Cigars of the Pharaoh, and the second being the Blue Lotus, which we'll do next. I have here the facsimile of the original black and white collected book edition. And this story is from 1932. So he did the black and white version in 1932, immediately following Tintin in America. And like the other early adventures, Hergé went back and redrew it when it was time to do release a color edition. But unlike those others that came out in 1945, 1946, he did not bring out a color version, a redrawn color version of Cigars of the Pharaoh until 1955. So a much longer interval had passed between the original version and the color version, which is the one that we have normally available to us now. And I'm not sure exactly why. I probably read about it at one point, and I read a lot about Hergé. I forget a lot about Hergé that I've read. But for some reason, it was not included in those redrawings of the early adventures that he did in the 40s. And it wasn't until his publisher, Casterman, requested that they release that they go back to the black and white version of Cigars and release a color version of it that he did. And so, more than 20 years had passed since the original version came out. And so you can imagine a job that would have been to sort of keep the period detail and yet update it in a style and a look that readers in 1955 would have been expecting. And also at that point, Hergé now had a studio. He had artists, assistants, collaborators working with him, working for him, helping him to produce not only these books, but there was a Tintin magazine that was being published. He had a whole operation going. And he had assistants working with him on the Tintin books themselves, although he would continue, apparently, up through to the end, drawing the figures himself. It was thought that he was the only one that could really bring them to life. He did have people working on things like backgrounds and doing detail for vehicles, automobiles, trains, planes, that sort of thing, which were always a very popular part of these adventures. And help with researching costumes and doing going out and actually doing sketch research and location, all that type of thing, which really helped to create this clear line style that he became known for. It was really because he had all these collaborators working with him, and one of them appears on the cover of the color edition. We have, I love this cover. This is one of my favorite Tintin covers, and it might be because I think this might be one of the first of the volumes that I came to own as a child. And so, things like that are always remembered fondly. Um, but I always loved this cover. I thought it was great. It was much better than the, the black and white cover. Here he's walking through which looks like some sort of Egyptian-style ruin, and cigars on the ground. He's following. It looks like he's following a trail of cigars. We wonder what is that all about. And then along the one wall is a row of sarcophagi with looks like mummified men inside them, with their little name signs and dates. Looks like the dates that they perhaps were mummified or died or killed, perhaps. And one of them here, we read E.P. Jacobini. And this turns out this was one of his main collaborators, Edgar P. Jacobs, who was one of the first to begin working with him. And we saw in Tintin in the Congo, Hergé had included himself and Edgar P. Jacobs in a little cameo appearance in one of the first panels. He would often do that. He would insert himself, often with Edgar P. Jacobs, in the stories, make little guest appearances like that. And of course, when I had this as a kid, I had no idea that this was an actual person. But there he is. He's made it onto the cover, one of Hergé's chief collaborators. Edgar P. Jacobs was not only did he work with Hergé and for Tintin magazine, but he went on to create the series Blake and Mortimer, which is another fine example of the clear line style that Hergé and his studio and Tintin magazine were really known to pioneer and to make popular. Okay. So I have here, this is my original copy from when I was a kid. And like I said, I think this was one of the first Tintin books that I had. I believe this and The Secret of the Unicorn were the first two that I had in my possession. You can see down here, this is published by Methuen. It's gotten so ragged and fragile that I don't even like to open it anymore. So just this last year, I bought a new copy. And this, of course, is from Little Brown, which is the American publisher of the English translations. Methuen was the Canadian publisher. So this is a Canadian edition. And the reason for that was when I was growing up in the 1970s, at least in the town where I lived, you really couldn't find Tintin. It wasn't readily available in the United States just then. It wasn't until a few years, maybe in the 80s, I began seeing them in American bookshops regularly. And now they're pretty common. But when I was growing up, nobody knew about Tintin, at least in the United States. My Canadian cousins did, though. And during the summers, my family would take a road trip up to Canada. We lived in Pennsylvania. We'd take like a all-day trip up to Ontario. And we would spend a week of the summer with my Canadian relatives. They lived out in the country. And that's how I discovered Tintin. They had the Tintin comics at their house, and I remember reading a few of them. In particular, Black Island and Tintin in Tibet were some of the ones that I remember. Some of the first ones that I read when I visited them, and of course I became immediately obsessed with them and wanted to have them myself. And eventually, I believe my uncle, on a visit down to Pittsburgh to visit us during Christmas one year, brought me a couple of these as stocking stuffers. So I got this and Secret of the Unicorn as my first volumes. Look on the back of this and we see the volumes that were available then, and we're missing quite a few from from the 24 in total. At that time, Tintin in America did not have an English language release, nor did Blue Lotus, which was the second part of this story. So the second part of this two-part story was not even yet available in English. The Broken Year had not yet come out. And of course, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, that would not be available in a facsimile edition for many years still. And then the last one, which we'll get to at the end of our series. So these were the ones that I looked forward to reading, and they're out of order. We have Cigars of the Pharaoh at the end here, and I think it's maybe because this was redone so late. This was redrawn so late. Maybe it was not released in an English language edition until after many of the others had come out. I see the rest of them are more or less in the order that they should be in. I would look at these. I would look at the back covers. The back covers to me were almost as fascinating as the front covers, because I would look at all the ones that I didn't have, and I would look at these little thumbnails, and I would try to sort of glean what information I could from them, and then years later I might actually get a copy of these, and it was really exciting. It's like putting together the missing pieces of a puzzle, you know. Okay, so we'll have this on the side here in case we need to refer to it, but we're going to take a look at the color version from 1955. Put my old one aside. And you can tell I haven't even opened this. It's there we go. So the color version was redrawn. It was released in 1955. It was probably drawn the year before, redrawn the year before, and then went through several editions after that, in which some of the art, at least in one part that I'll point out, was updated, and this is an example of the how I mentioned at the start of the series the inconsistencies that we find when we read the Tintin adventures, because they were released in updated color versions out of order, and so you have all sorts of inconsistencies in the stories popping up, and we'll talk about why that might be when we come to them. But right off the bat here, we have another curiosity that I encountered when I was a child, although I didn't realize it until later when I realized that the Tintin was in fact Belgian, and that these were originally French language comics. It didn't occur to me then. When you read the English language editions, they're written to give you the impression that Tintin is English and that he's from England, and there are all these little hints and clues that suggest that and are meant to lead you to believe that. And I think that was the intention of the English language translators, who were British. He speaks in a much more British way. That's why I didn't think he was an American. He'll say little things that Americans would never say. And so I thought, oh, he must be English. Anyway, the Cigars of the Pharaoh starts off. And by the way, because the artwork was done and the color artwork was redrawn in 1955, we're now at kind of the acme or the high point of Hergé's drawing. This is considered the peak of his style, and it really, when you read them in order, you go from Tintin in America, even that, which was drawn in the early 40s, to this, and you see a big shift in the sophistication of the look and the drawing and the detail and even the detail in the ship and all the locations. They were really doing a lot more work and getting the detail right and doing research, and it is very obvious. And so this was one of the first ones that I read as a kid, and so this was the look of Tintin that I became used to right off the bat. And so when I would read those older adventures, the ones that were drawn maybe 10 years, even 10 years before or older, the change in style is very noticeable. And I would look at so when we come to the Broken Ear especially, which was one of the first ones that I bought myself. It might have been after Cigars and Secret of the Unicorn, maybe the third volume I bought. And the drawing style is much more, I don't want to say primitive, but not up to the standard. And I remember looking at it at first and thinking, is this really a Tintin comic? Is this really one of the series, or is this a fake Tintin? The way he was drawn, he still had that kind of round golf ball head rather than the more oval shaped one that, he's much more to model here. Okay, now let's go on. So we begin the adventure. Tintin is not going out on assignment like he did during the first three adventures. He's now taking a vacation, and he's relaxing on the side of the ship, musing about his itinerary. We're even given a map here. We're shown where he's planning on going. He's planning on they're going to Egypt, and then from there down through the Red Sea to India, around through islands of Malaysia, finally up to Shanghai. It's interesting because this is kind of the trajectory that the story takes us through, all the way through the end of the Blue Lotus. But as we'll see, this is not his ocean liner trip gets hijacked early on. So he's here with Snowy, and he's telling Snowy where they're going, and Snowy's not impressed. He says, "I'll settle for Marlinspike." Marlinspike. So Marlinspike is as we learn in The Secret of the Unicorn, which is still how many adventures away? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more adventures from the time that he did Cigars of the Pharaoh. Marlinspike is a place that we learn about here, and already Snowy is talking about Marlinspike. So we already have here of course, readers in 1955 would have been familiar with Marlinspike. They would have known, oh yeah, that's where Tintin lives with Captain Haddock, or maybe he didn't. He hadn't moved in just yet, but that's where Captain Haddock lives. That's where Tintin and his circle spend all their time, at Marlinspike Hall. All right, so readers, when this color edition came out, would have known Marlinspike. But if you read this in order, you haven't even heard of Marlinspike yet. What is he talking about? So this would have been an addition to the color edition. And also the name Marlinspike is a very English sounding name. So again, something that suggests the fact that it's called Marlinspike. In the French, it's Moulinsart. In the English, it's anglicized to an English sounding place name. So again, we have the suggestion that Tintin is English. Okay, so Tintin says, what about that for a marvelous cruise, eh, Snowy? He says, you mean dull as ditch water. Why doesn't someone fall overboard to brighten things up? And as soon as he says that, somebody starts yelling, stop, stop, help, help. And we have a character here running, chasing after a paper that's blowing off. Help, help, stop, who, what, where? There, save that paper, it's blowing away. It's my kiosk papyrus. Help, somebody, I'll get it for you. The man's yelling, fire, police, murder. Tintin runs into one of the sailors, knocks the wind out of him. And the man continues chasing after the paper as it blows overboard. When I was a kid, I loved these old-fashioned costumes. I mean, in 1955, this would have been very, very outdated. This would have made him look like something from the previous century. The top hat and the stand-up collar and the cutaway jacket, the morning jacket. So we have these kind of characters all the time in Tintin, these old professor-like characters who are dressed in a style that is maybe 100 years out of date already. And very much like Calculus, actually, a character that will come along later. And Tintin wonders, well, what has happened to him? And he finds him in one of the lifeboats, rowing. What are you doing? Surely you can see I'm rowing. But we're not in the water. But you're not in the water, nor I am. What an observant young man you are. Now I wonder, why was I rowing? Because you were chasing after that papyrus, I expect. And he says, my papyrus? My precious manuscript overboard? Nonsense, I have it here. But I saw the paper blow into the sea. He says, oh yes, I remember now, it's just a travel brochure. So already we know what sort of character we're dealing with here. And then he goes on to tell Tintin what his papyrus is. It is a key to the lost tomb of the Pharaoh, kiosk. Scores of Egyptologists have tried to find the spot, and every single one has vanished. But I, and we get his name finally, Sophocles' sarcophagus, shall be the first to reveal this wonder to the world. So when this was done in 1932, the world was still kind of Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut's tomb was still pretty much in the minds of people. It was not old news. It was not new news, but it was still a thing. It was part of the culture. So this Egyptology had become a popular thing, especially in the West. And we see here on for the first time we see the cipher of the Pharaoh. He says, "Tell me, what is that queer symbol?" It's the royal cipher of kiosk. And then he sees the Tintins interested in him, and he says, "Well, why don't you join me in Port Said when we disembark tomorrow? We'll go on to Cairo, and we'll find the place that's in the papyrus." And Tintin agrees. And then as he leaves, he shakes Snowy's hand by mistake. "Till tomorrow, then. Goodbye, young man." He said, "What a strange fellow." He runs right into one of these ventilators or whatever these things are and says, "I beg your pardon, Captain." And then as if that's not enough, Tintin turns to go and he hears an argument break out. "You clumsy nitwit, can't you look where you're going? I'm sorry, I mistook you for a ventilator. Imbecile!" And who is it? But we now have not the first appearance. We saw him in the last volume in Tintin in America, but we are now introduced to the character of Rastapopoulos, the film mogul, millionaire, and we're later to find out also arch villain. And Tintin goes to break up the fight. Rastapopoulos is about ready to strike him. Tintin interrupts, and Rastapopoulos is enraged. Impudent young whippersnapper, how dare you interfere? You obviously don't know who I am. You regret you crossed my path. Just remember, my name is Rustopopoulos. And Tintin has heard of Rustopopoulos. Ah, I've got it, the millionaire film tycoon, king of Cosmos Pictures. And then he says here, and it's not the first time we've met. So that's interesting. Is he alluding to the fact that they met in Tintin in America? Or did Hergé insert this into the color edition because people would have already been familiar with Rustopopoulos by the time the color edition came out because of other volumes in which he had appeared? I'm going to look that up right now, actually, in the black and white. And so the black and white that I have here is in English. Again, like the other black and whites, this is much longer, and the pages are 3 tiers. So when he redrew it, he had to recast them in a 4-tier grid, and the book became much shorter as a result. But he also had to cut out a lot of the sequences from the black and white edition to make it fit into the standard, was it 64-page scheme? Sarcophagus here looks a little bit different. Yeah, so he says, Rustopopoulos, of course, the millionaire film tycoon of Cosmos Pictures. Oh, wow, I've really done it now. So yeah, that mention that they've met before is not in the original black and white. We cut right to the scene with Thompson and Thompson coming up. So I think that was put into the color version because readers would already have been familiar with Rustopopoulos. So Hergé was trying to make things a little bit more, have things make sense a little bit more. But in the process, he ends up confusing the chronology, giving us all these inconsistencies. No, this is the first time that Rustopopoulos appears. And then we see that evening, somebody is writing a note. Watch out, he's met a young journalist who could be a nuisance. I want him disposed of before he gets ashore. And then they're signing it with the Pharaoh's cipher, the kiosk cipher. So we know, okay, the plot thickens. Something is up here. Who's he talking about? He's met a young journalist. Are they talking about Rustopopoulos? Are they talking about Sarcophagus? The next morning, Tintin goes into his cabin, and one of the great things about this volume is there are so many characters that go on to make repeated appearances in the story, and Rustopopoulos being one of them, Thompson and Thompson, the twin detectives, being the other major ones. So Thompson and Thompson, and in the original edition, they were not called Thompson and Thompson. They they had sort of like they had numbers. I think they were called X33 and maybe X32 or something like that. And it wasn't until later that Hergé gave them the name. In French, it was Dupont and Dupont. And in English, it's Thompson and Thompson. One has a P in Thompson and the other doesn't. And the only way you tell them apart is by their mustaches. So they're not actually twins. They just happen to look almost exactly alike and almost happen to have exactly the same name. So we don't know. So this is the first time that we're supposed to have seen them. Although they did make an appearance in the Congo as well, in that first panel where Tintin is about ready to board the train. They're off to the side, they're observing him. And Hergé was careful to write in their dialogue in that panel in a way to suggest that they hadn't met yet. They're just observing, oh, there's a young reporter going off, which is good because this is actually the first time that Tintin is meeting them in the chronology. However, as we'll see coming up here, we have another little bit of dialogue which leads us to believe that maybe it's not the first time that they've met. So he says, he's gone in. Yes, come on. They have this habit of repeating. One repeats what the other says slightly differently. Your name is Tintin? Of course. We arrest you in the name of the law. So this here, I don't know if this is how I'm taking it, but when they come in and they ask, is your name Tintin? His response is, of course, which always led me to believe that, well, they know each other. Of course my name is Tintin. You know my name is Tintin, right? So I thought that maybe Hergé wrote that in as well in the updated version because readers would have already been familiar with them and know that they're already good friends. So we take a look at the original and we have them coming in, Mr. Tintin, yes. So normal kind of reply, yes. Changing it to, of course, gives a little bit of a different meaning, you know? So again, I think maybe he was retroactively trying to suggest their relationship. Anyway, they arrest him in the name of the law. Arrest me, you must be joking. Joking, I'll open one of those drawers and we'll see what kind of joke it is. And they pull out narcotics, that's heroin. And this is kind of a heavy thing to find in a kid's comic. So one of the things that, you know, I have maybe a little bit of a problem with when my kids look at these, when I share these with my kids, well, there's the racist elements, obviously, first of all. And then there's the violence. Everybody's carrying around guns. It's kind of like, you know, in this day and age, it's not a great thing that you want your kids to be well, you know, it's a complicated issue, yeah. But you know, obviously they it's exciting for them. Guns and violence are exciting, and you kind of want them to have a healthy attitude about it. But then the whole thing about narcotics and heroin, and it's just a strange thing to our modern sensibilities to find in a kid's comic. He's put in the hold now of the ship, and he's scheming how he's going to get out of there. He sees a boat coming by. Its mast is right up by his porthole, and he uses that to slide down the mast. And the poor fisherman turns around and is surprised to find him. Could you possibly take us ashore? A few minutes later, he finds himself in Port Said. And there, he finds Professor Sarcophagus walking around, and he greets him by saying, Happy New Year. He's completely out of it as usual. Another note we see, gave the police a slip. Sarcophagus is already ashore. They'll probably make for Cairo. You have your orders, carry them out. And this is the first time now we see Thompson and Thompson are on the trail of Tintin. He's escaped them, and they've got to get him back. He's their prisoner. And the first time we see this thing that they do. Of course, these adventures take place all over the world, and every time the Thompsons make their appearance, this is the same gag that happens every time. They attempt to mix in with the crowd wherever they are by dressing in a native fashion, and of course, they're usually dressed in some ridiculous style, often completely inappropriate or out of date, or they don't at all mix in with the natives. They stand out like sore thumbs. And so here they are with their Egyptian fezzes, and they're wearing their stiff collars and ties underneath their outfits. And they say, he won't get far if my name's Thompson. To be precise, if my name's Thompson, we won't get far. So it's another little running gag where they repeat each other, and the second one who says it sort of mixes up what the first one says, and it's just really bumbling idiots, these two are.